Hello, thank you for joining me. I'm Tamsin Bellaby and I'm going to talk to you today about engaging challenging parents. So I've been a head of house and more recently head of year 11. I'm about to start a new role in January where I'm Key Stage 4 and 5 achievement lead. So very much bridging that gap between pastoral and academic experiences and sort of identifying those barriers to learning within the pastoral realm and the academic realm. So my talk is very much for pastoral leaders, form tutors, depending on the sort of structure that you have, and how much of a role form tutors are taking within the school. I certainly would hope that some senior leaders might find this talk useful if they're having lots of conversations with challenging parents. I would suspect it's going to be less useful for classroom teachers. It's certainly more for somebody that has sustained contact with challenging parents on sort of frequent occasions. So I'm going to begin by clarifying exactly what I mean by challenging parents. So I would clarify it. I would state that a challenging parent is somebody whose actions or inactions make it harder for you to teach their child. It might be as well that the parent's actions or inactions make it harder for the child to learn and behave appropriately within school. It may be that child's actions then make it even harder to teach other children in school. So their behaviour almost sort of creates a hole or a gap in the sort of cultural fence. So somehow the child and the parent's actions are sort of leading them to want to operate beyond your school rules. I am in no way suggesting that challenging parents are bad parents. That is not what I'm saying at all. Challenging parents might have different values or different experiences of education, different beliefs and wants. Some parents that I've come across have not always innately trusted that the school's interests had the child at its heart. And I think sometimes there is that sort of mistrust that can come from different groups of parents. So I believe often that a challenging parent, often they care deeply about their child, usually because they're taking vast amounts of time to sort of talk to you or to communicate with you about what they're unhappy about. So the chances are they are usually a very good parent and they're usually a very caring parent, and I'm certainly not suggesting that they're bad parents. I am just going to highlight that I'm not going to talk today about sort of disaffected parents. You know, those hard to reach parents that they won't pick up the phone, they won't communicate by email, they won't come to parents' evening. That's a whole talk in itself. And that's not something that I'm going to cover today. So my suggestions have come from 2 years of being a pastoral leader. And they are very much directed at your 3 or 5% of your cohort. This is not something that you could roll out to the whole year group, for example, or to the whole school. So it's very much a targeted approach. So as a pastoral leader, my experience has certainly been that I've spent large proportions of my time dealing with a very small proportion of the cohort, and it's really, really hard because often the people that need your attention take vast amounts of it, and then the other students that are just sort of getting on don't always get your attention, and I find that very, very frustrating as a pastoral leader. So some of the tips and suggestions that I've sort of discovered along the way are really, they're just about improving communication, and they're certainly not suggesting that you would do any more work for this sort of 3 to 5% cohort, this targeted group. I'm very conscious of workload on pastoral leaders. It's huge, it's vast, and I'm not going to try and make any suggestions that increase that. What I would hope is that you might take from this some more time efficient strategies. the goal, why do we want to improve parent communication? Why do we want to make sure that we're all, we're all on the same page? Why we all want the same thing? We all want children to be successful and to be happy and safe. So why improve this communication? So for me, I want to improve communication with parents because I want to demonstrate to those parents that the school has the child's best interests at heart. I want to really ensure that parents and adults understand the motivation behind the school's decisions or rules or things that are happening within those four walls. So I also want to ensure that we are aligning the expectations of children's behaviour, so it's really, really clear what we expect. This is how your child should behave. I want to improve relations between the adults. So often challenging parents might present as being quite stressed, quite emotional, quite sort of highly strung. It can be, fraught with tension. So I'm hoping that by improving relations over time between those adults, that actually it reduces stress for both you having to deal with the stressed parent, but equally for the parent and equally for the student sort of watching their parent being stressed. And then eventually reducing stress often results in reducing time of dealing with that. So fingers crossed it's an investment. I also would like, the goal is to grow positive support for the school at home. So we know from David Didow's Making Kids Cleverer, Making Kids Cleverer, that we know that parents' influence is far greater than a teacher's influence. So therefore we need to tap in to making sure that we're all on the same page. We all want the same thing, we're all communicating the same thing. So that student, that child, is getting a united message from all of their adults. And that's far more reassuring for a student. It's far more settling, and it's, a united front. It's just so clear what the expectations are, right from wrong. Okay, so I'm going to give a small caveat. I am not suggesting that any of these suggestions that I'm going to make are something that you could roll out to all of your students, all of your staff. It would be impossible, and it just wouldn't be beneficial, and it's not necessary at all. My suggestions are not in any way a sort of chronological order. They're not in a sequence. They're literally like a sort of range of techniques that you might pick and choose, and different circumstances, different students are going to require you to use different techniques. And you'll know your parents best. You'll know your demographic best, what works for you. So many of my suggestions, sadly, are reactive, and it's deliberate, really. It's often because you don't know who your challenging parents are until they present to you and they are already unhappy. But you can be prepared with a plan. So a little bit like an evacuation procedure. If you were sort of worried there were going to be a fire, you would have a procedure. It would be well practiced. You'd know exactly what you were going to do if there were a fire, but sadly you have got to wait until there is a fire to know if it works. So some of these strategies are going to be sort of resting in your back pocket until you get that phone call or that email, and hopefully you'll be able to draw upon some of these. Improving communication with parents is about rowing in the same direction. It's ensuring that all of the adults involved in developing a child all have agreed that they want the same thing. They want the child to be happy, they want the child to be safe, they want their child to learn, and equally we want teachers to be able to teach, and we want the other children within that environment to be able to learn too. So we have to understand, if we can understand the why, we can make any what happen. And this is something that I heard a colleague of mine, Mark Wilkinson, discuss on Twitter. And it just really resonated with me. So if we understand the why, we can make any what happen. And this led me to reflect on some of the challenging conversations that I've had with parents. It is often a sort of breakdown of understanding, a breakdown of communication, that we as adults within a school deeply understand the sort of power and the importance of desired behaviour, of sort of routines, of thinking of others, whereas actually often parents are not aware of how that all builds into a big picture. And I think that if you can improve that relationship between yourself, the school, and the parents, you can often sort of bridge that gap and help them to understand that every decision that a school makes is always for the best of the child and for the best of all of the students. So you might say, why are you bothering with parents? As a school, we can only influence what happens up to the school gates. And I know that there are very much sort of two camps in education. There are people that think, that you can influence up to the school gates. And at that point, the child leaves and goes home, and actually that's beyond us. There's nothing we can do. And then there are a sort of group of teachers or educators that believe that you can positively influence all of the adults involved in a child's development. And certainly at this stage in my career, that's what I believe. I genuinely believe that it takes a village to raise a child. It's a community effort. It's certainly not an individual endeavour of teachers and then the child goes home and it's an individual endeavour of parents. I think all of the adults within a community are striving and need to agree the same things, that you want to raise a child to be kind, to be brave, to be respectful, to have a sense of responsibility, to be an asset to their society. And I believe that's what we're all doing, and we all need to be rowing in that direction. Now, often the disagreements come, and how do you make that happen? How does the everyday routines of school and education, build towards making that child into an adult that is an asset to their society? I had a conversation with a quite a famous transformative head teacher, and he said to me, forget the parents. He didn't actually, he used another F word, a well-known one, but I won't say that. He said, forget the parents. He said, they're all grown up and they're not going to change. They're not going to change their attitudes, and you're going to really struggle to influence those parents. So what you need to do is you need to influence those children, and then it goes home with them, and that your school culture is so rich and so strong that the child takes it home with them. And I agree. I absolutely do agree. There's very little to argue with there. However, I think if you've got a capacity issue and you've really got to sort of pick what you're working on, perhaps you're in a very challenging school, perhaps you're at the beginning of a transformative journey, you have got to pick and focus what you're going to work on. And of course, at that point, you probably will just focus on what you can directly control within your gates and boundaries of the school. But surely the dream is to embed a school culture, a strong culture of study and character development and personal responsibility that transcends the boundaries of the school fence, and it broadens the school's influence into the home environment too. Because after all, don't we want students to do homework, to read for pleasure, to be kind and helpful to their families and their communities? And actually, if we look at schools like Michaela, they are modelling what is possible. So I'm going to move on to some of my tips, and certainly some of the things that I have gained experience from in my few years as a pastoral leader. I don't claim to have all the answers, but certainly these are things that I've done, and at the moment this is my thinking. So things that I always go to when I'm communicating with challenging parents. I always use the word we and not I, because I recognise that I am a spokesperson for a larger body. So I am, of course, I am the royal we talking about school. I frame every communication with parents and with children as well from a place of love, and I show concern and care for that child, and I deliberately try to display sort of curiosity, like why would this be happening, and I sort of want to get to the bottom of things, and I really try to show parents that I am genuinely curious why this is happening. And I try really hard as well not to normalise poor behaviour from the child. So if I'm having repeated communications with a parent and I'm having to call sort of almost daily or several times a week to say, unfortunately your child has made a poor choice again today, I try to feign shock every time, because I want the parent to know that I am genuinely a believer that better behaviour is possible, that it doesn't have to be like this, and that I have certainty and hope that that child can improve their behaviour. Now this can be really difficult. I try so hard to be really brave when I speak to parents, and it can be really, really difficult to say those things that need to be said and that you're thinking and that everybody in the room is thinking. But it's really hard, but you have to say it, because if you don't, you're letting the child down and you're letting the parent down. You need to say what you mean and mean what you say. You need to use very sort of deliberate and exact language, and you need to be brave. Kind, always kind, but brave too. If that parent is not holding the line or not supporting the child by sort of telling them that their behaviour is incorrect, tell them. And it's really hard. It's the hardest part of my job, definitely. And I also live by another mantra. So I under promise and I over deliver. So I try really hard to be careful of what I commit to, what I promise parents. So if I promise a communication, as far as I'm concerned, I absolutely have to do that. I can't ever say I will do something and not do it, just like we do with students. So I'm very careful about what I agree to. And again, I say to parents, I'm really sorry, I can't agree to that. That's not something, within the daily schedule that's going to allow me to do. So, be really careful what you agree to and what you promise. So I'm going to talk about different methods of communication, and I'm going to start with emails. So obviously we can communicate with parents in all sorts of different ways. Emails. I'm going to talk about telephone conversations, and I'm also going to talk about face-to-face meetings. So I'm going to start with emails. So for me, I try really hard to remember that emails are for brief information exchanges. They're for confirmations, they're for reminders, they're for FYIs. I do regularly receive sort of emotive or heated, sort of long-winded emails that are sort of fraught with stress and tension from parents. And for me, I don't reply via email to those emails. They are something that then is going to trigger a phone call from me or a face-to-face meeting. I do this because tone is so important. We've all sent an email in a rush, and somebody has misconstrued what we meant, and we've sort of caused offence and made a problem worse. We've all read a text message and taken it the wrong way, and I think actually busy educational professionals very easily can send something that we certainly haven't really carefully thought through. So tone of voice is a really powerful thing, is a really powerful part of communication. So actually when I pick up the phone, I'm able then to choose my words carefully, and ensure that I'm not making an already tense situation worse. So I will, however, reply to that initial email with a sort of holding email, and it will acknowledge the receipt, and it will tell the parent very clearly what I intend to do next. So for example, I might say, "Dear Mrs. Smith, thank you so much for your huge email. I can see that you're very upset. I'll call you this afternoon after 3 p.m. to discuss." Okay. So, words of wisdom about emails. I'm very cautious about what I say in emails. It's very easy to thoughtlessly forward an email. It's happened to me before, and I've learnt greatly from that. So perhaps being a little too casual or a little too informal in an email, and it's been forwarded without anybody thinking or realizing, and of course, it's something you're thinking, oh, I didn't mean for that person to read that, or I certainly wouldn't have worded it like that if I'd have known it was going to be forwarded. So I'm very careful about how I communicate via email, and I have a little mantra. So I dance like no one's watching, but I email like it's a deposition being read aloud in court, and I'm very careful about what I put. So following an email, particularly sort of a lengthy email to parents and to staff. This is something that I use for staff regularly, sort of form tutors and teachers and what have you. I will sum up the action points of what everybody needs to do. So for example, there'll be an FYI section which will detail the context and the information that we've all been discussing, a sort of, you all need to know this bit, but then actually underneath what I do is I put a very clear section that's actions. And in those actions, it will be what exactly needs to be done, very explicit, lots of detail, by when, and by whom. So busy SLT members can quickly scan through what they need to know, or if they're really busy, they can think, I don't need to know that, I already know it. For example, perhaps they were in the meeting, but actually those actions are what's really, really important. It holds everybody to account. It makes everybody very clear about what those next steps are. So that was actually a system used by Amy Pass, who's an SLT member at the school that I'm teaching at the moment, and it was just so powerful in the way that she led the pastoral team, and it's something that I've adopted and taken with me. So great tip from Amy there. So if we think about understand, that all of the adults involved in developing a child and raising a child, if they have to understand the why so that they can make any what happen. If we think about emails, they're another tool to allow all of the adults to be rowing in the same direction, and it's to remind everyone that we all want the same thing. We all want the child to be happy and safe, we want the child to be able to learn, and we want other children to be able to learn within that school too. Emails are not there to discuss or communicate or to hash out the why, the big picture. That's not what they're there for. That's being done face to face or on Teams or on a phone, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But emails are very much there to sort of remind parents, and then through the parents, the students too, what those behavioural norms, what those expectations are, the everyday sort of routines that we need that young person to be doing to succeed. So just to remind you, don't discuss emotive topics in emails. And I often, if I've had a big conversation on the phone or in a meeting with parents or carers, I tend to summarise that meeting by email, and again putting in those action points, and then I can forward that to them, but it's also documentation for myself as well. So I'm going to move on to phone calls. So this might be that first call that you've got to make when something's not gone to plan. So a student perhaps has not made a good choice. So phone calls are going to be that most frequently used method of communication because they're time efficient and just convenient. I always like to try and get a positive call in early. So if I know that there's a parent that I'm taking on that's sort of got a reputation as being quite challenging, I will get that call in as soon as possible. It's sort of, I sort of see it as emotional currency, and just sort of building my professional responsibility with them so that they know who to speak to, and they'd already spoken to me before I have to say anything negative about their child. So I quite like to get that call in if I can. So when I call to speak to a parent, I try to discuss the behaviour of the child. I try and depersonalise that behaviour. So I use words like choices, like they've not made good choices today. I might say things like they've had a bad day today. I certainly wouldn't say something like Charlie has been bad today, or or anything like that, because it's very much about removing that sort of separation between the child and the choice of that behaviour. So I'm very factual in if I need to sort of recount an incident or an event, I try and be quite chronological, zero emotion at this point, no opinions, no judgment, and I will literally just recount the events. I will then sort of take a position of concern for the child, genuine curiosity, why could this have happened, and again from a position of love. I don't shy away from using the word love. We as teachers are teachers because we love children and we want them to have a great life and to make the world a better place, so that I don't shy away from the fact that I work from a position of love, and I speak with hope. and certainty that the behaviour is going to improve and it's going to get better. I try to very clearly narrate desired behaviour in the circumstances that have occurred. So this is what Charlie chose to do in that circumstance. This is what he should have done. Because I don't like to assume that all children know exactly how to behave and what would have been the socially acceptable choice. So of course at that point, Tom Bennett talks at length that we should deliberately educate children about what good behaviour looks like. So we can't just assume that they all know. So I try to be very clear, and I do this obviously with children as well, but in the context of discussing parents, I make sure that I make it very clear what the child should have done. So hopefully they can have conversations at home and sort of reinforce that message following my phone call. To parents as well, I try to highlight the impact not only on their child. So let's say there's been an incident. Obviously they are concerned about their own child, but it can be difficult for a parent to envisage actually the impact on the wider community that incident has had. So let's say, for example, I want to make sure that they understand the impact on the rest of the students within that class. So what happened to the other 29 children whilst their child was performing this incident? What happened to the teacher? How would the teacher might have felt? And any other people involved, were the canteen staff that were then having extra work to clear up, and all those kinds of things. So I think it's really important to paint the picture of the implications within the school environment. It's very easy for us to take it for granted that we understand if there's bad behaviour, what happens from that. They might not have made those connections and those thought processes. So I want to talk to you now about how to have a conversation with a parent on the phone who's really angry, and they might be quite sort of highly strung, they might be shouting and just sort of really cross. So I feel that angry parents have a right to be heard. They deserve to have a rant, to have a blowout. They deserve to be listened to. And what I try to do is sit quietly and I listen without interrupting. And often what I find is if you just give them some time and make those listening noises, the active listening, yes, yeah, it's really important that they'll often blow out and they'll feel heard. So then what I tend to do is, whilst I'm on the phone, I might make a few notes and just unpick a few, sort of take down a few key points, because it can often be, when people are cross, it can often be a sort of jumble of emotion and, and another thing, and then this thing happened 6 months ago. And actually, if you're sitting there sort of listening and taking some notes, you can usually tease out some points that you can work with. So then I don't really know how else to say other than I hold the line. This is our academy rules. Perhaps an incident that has occurred. These are our school rules, and I explain to the parent why the rules are in place. I might need to give a little bit more clarity about those rules and what they look like in action and why they're there. Why we have them, and that to highlight the fact that if 900 children all acted in the way that one child had, what chaos we would have and how unsafe it would be. So I hold the line, and I also always back the classroom teacher. I always back them, and I try really hard to sort of publicly protect them from parent confrontation. I've had many parents in the past that have sort of demanded meetings with with that teacher, and they almost want to sort of have it out with them. And to me, there's no good that's going to come from that. There is no sort of positive solutions that are going to come from that meeting. And actually what we're going to do is create a very sort of stressed out teacher. We're going to increase their workload. And actually what we need to do is to back that classroom teacher to say, no, you did the right thing. You followed our classroom policies. This is exactly what we have asked you to do. Thank you so much for having the strength and the courage and the love for that child to hold them to account. And actually it's about sort of talking to the child and talking to the parent and ensuring that they understand that the teacher operated in a desirable way, that the head teacher has asked them to uphold those rules. Now, of course, there are going to be times, sometimes where perhaps a classroom teacher has got it wrong. And then at that point, that's not going to be resolved with a parent and a student in the room. That's not the environment that a teacher would be. Just, you know, that at that point is a senior leader or myself having a conversation with that teacher about ensuring that course of events doesn't happen again, and actually what should happen. So at that point, I don't think I've ever had a meeting with a teacher and a parent in those kind of circumstances. I've always protected the teacher from that. That's very much my job to sort of field that confrontation. Obviously at parents' evening, that's the only time that parents would have that opportunity to try and you know, perhaps to sort of confront a teacher. So I'm going back to the phone call. So if there's a parent on the phone sort of feeling cross with me, and sort of having a good blowout and a really good sort of rant, and they're very cross, I would try and speak very calmly and very slowly, because I want to model to them the behaviour that I expect them to show their child. I have had many conversations in the past where a child has been in the background, sort of chipping in, you know, with something to say, and another thing, and another thing. No, you didn't say that. You know, I have been in that situation where the child has put me on speakerphone. And I think looking back, it's things that we live and learn, don't we? At that point, I needed to end the phone call very politely and say that actually this is almost like a larger problem. Actually, this is a problem where, you know, the child should not be sort of encouraged by their parents or carers to be discussing this on the phone with their teacher. At that point, it's for the adults to discuss. So I think I would politely end that phone call and arrange for a face-to-face meeting, because I think it sounds like there is a wider problem there. I think if parents are getting quite aggrieved, it's often a good thing to try and get them to agree to a sort of common desire. So think of it as finding out, you know, what do we all want from this situation? What do we all want the child that attends our school to do? We want the child to learn. We want the child to be happy and to feel safe, and get some agreement, some consensus between the adults that we all want the same thing. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take this agreement, which, you know, it might be that you've all agreed that you want Charlie to feel safe at school, and you're going to use that agreement as like a linchpin, and you're going to keep coming back to it. That's your why. Okay, when we think about what Mark Wilkinson said about, you know, if we understand the why, we can make any what happen. You're going to use this agreement, this, you know, everybody's agreed around the table or on the phone that actually we want Charlie to feel safe at school. And we're going to keep returning back to it. And actually what I find is when tensions get high again, you can keep bringing it back down and bringing it back down to actually, you know, we need to remember we all want Charlie to feel safe in this environment, and by him performing these actions, for example, would lead to other people not feeling safe, and ultimately it not being a safe environment for Charlie. So we can always bring it back, you know, find an agreement, keep bringing it back. Okay, so sometimes if I'm really struggling with a parent and we just can't sort of find consensus, we can't find agreement, I reframe a situation and I ask a parent, I sort of flip it, and I ask a parent to consider the situation if it were reversed. You know, to think about the other students within this situation, to think about the member of staff within that situation, and see if I can sort of tap into some empathy, perhaps, that the parent might have for the other people that are involved in that circumstances. So a few things that I've learned along the way are it is perfectly okay to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. I think within our roles as pastoral leaders, we're sort of expected to be sort of omnipresent and to know everything. Well, of course we can't be. We you know, there's often 9 out of 10. There's often events that are happening, and I wasn't there, and I don't know what happened. And you may well be questioned by parents that, you know, well, what happened and why didn't they do this? And you don't know the answer. And at that point, it's absolutely okay to say, I don't know, but I'm going to find out for you. And it's not a weakness. I think if anything, it builds trust. It takes strength to admit that you don't know and to say that you're going to go and find out. And hopefully you're sort of working towards building trust with those parents. Something I do if a parent is really pushing me repeatedly to sort of agree to something, and perhaps it's something that we really disagree on. I'm going to use the example of fidget spinners. So, you know, perhaps a parent feels that, you know, that my child needs a fidget spinner, and I feel very strongly that no, they're a distraction, and it's not going to be good for the child or for the rest of the class. What I'll do is I'll respond to the parent and let them know immediately what my initial stance is. You know, initially I feel like it's a no. And if they keep pushing, what I may well do is say to them, okay, I'm willing to reflect on it. I'm willing to go and speak to some of my other colleagues, and to sort of gather their expertise and their thoughts on it too. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to you. So you're deferring the decision, you're deferring the confrontation, because you've said, I'll look into it. And then you're going to come back to them with a decision. So actually the conversation has ended there. So it's that confrontation is ended. And that's quite a good way of sort of moving on if you feel like you're sort of at a sticking point. So my next point is quite controversial. I never say sorry. I never say sorry. I feel I come from a sales background, and certainly I've been sort of raised in my corporate environment that saying sorry is kind of an admission of guilt, and it can get you into sort of hot water in the future. So I often will say very sympathetic things, so things like, oh gosh, yes, I can completely see you're very frustrated. I acknowledge feelings, but I don't say sorry for the actual actions. Now, sometimes it's very rare, but sometimes there might be a genuine situation where an apology is needed. And at that point, that's when I'm going to defer to the more senior people above me, so senior leadership or the head teacher. And if there's an apology to be given, then that needs to come from them, in my opinion, or they are to instruct me to apologise on behalf. But certainly I sort of hold the belief that saying sorry is quite an admission of guilt in these circumstances. So I tend not to do that. So my last point on phone calls is, if a conversation is becoming really heated, really emotional, and you're just thinking this is not effective, we're just tit for tat, it's like a tennis match of people being cross. It's perfectly okay to defer that conversation for a few hours or even 24 hours or a couple of days, and it's okay, because I think it sounds like everybody needs to calm down, and you've got to remember that parents are emotionally involved in these conversations, and I never ever accept being sworn at. So if a parent swears at me, at that point I will end the conversation, be it a phone call, email, or a meeting, and say that at that point that's not acceptable. And when I speak to them next, I will usually ensure that I've got a more senior member of staff with me, just to sort of protect myself from that. So phone calls are useful for repeatedly conveying those messages, a bit like an echo, and ensuring that parents and students repeatedly hear how much we care about students, and that you deeply care, and that you all want the same things. It's that sort of opportunity to bring everybody back together again. We all want the same thing, and then remind them of how that same message, how the why can be achieved every day by doing these specific things: the what, the routines, and the everyday actions in school that build towards improving a child's behaviour, and improving their success within school. So lastly, I'm going to discuss face-to-face meetings, and of course in our COVID world, I'm obviously going to include Teams meetings in this too. So challenging parents that call you or email regularly, and are sort of often unhappy, I would personally invite them into the school as soon as possible. I wouldn't delay with that. It's much harder to be sort of rude or aggressive to someone in person, and also rude and aggressive to somebody that you have met, that they are a person that you see regularly within the sort of school context. So I definitely think it's easier for you to convey how much the school cares for the child, and how you want the best for the child within an environment of meeting face to face, or worst case scenario, a Teams meeting. So when I invite the parents in, the first thing I often say to them is, how would they like me to refer to them? What would they like to be called? Is it Miss? Is it their first name? etc. And I consider my venue very carefully. So at the school I've just finished at, we had a very grand and very beautiful boardroom. It sort of added lots of gravitas, and there was a very long table, and it all felt very, very formal. But then there are also different meeting room options that were sort of smaller, more intimate, circular tables, for example. So I think you need to choose your venue very carefully, and you need to think about what you are communicating to the parents by which venue you choose. You know, and that can be quite a powerful first impression of where you choose to meet that parent. So I always invite the adults into a room first, and I tend to leave the children outside of the room, because it's very much about not having any public disagreements. You know, we want to present the adults within the care of the children, so the teachers and the adults. It's really important that we present a united front. I think when you have the splits between the disagreements, the very public disagreements between between parents and staff, I think that's when you tend to get the child sort of finding wiggle room. It's quite natural for them to want to do that, but they find their boundaries or lack of boundaries, and they tend to sort of present in that wiggle room of sort of playing the adults off against each other. We've all sort of experienced that kind of activity, and I want children to take personal responsibility. I think that's part of growing up. That's part of becoming a good adult, an asset to society, taking responsibility for yourself. So for me, those united fronts that are presented by teachers and parents, that's when we're going to have sort of success in genuinely improving sort of behaviour and attitude to learning from students that perhaps have not been presenting attitudes that are favourable. So I don't shy away from asking parents to agree that they will always support the school publicly to their child, and I literally explain why, as I just have, and I say to them, if you've got concerns or disagreements, please do not speak to your child about it. Call me, email me, come and see me, whatever needs to happen. But actually you're sort of damaging the relationship between the school and the student if you are constantly criticizing or sort of questioning decisions that have been made at school. It's much easier. Present a united front, tell the child that you support the school, and you can always question behind closed doors and have those disagreements behind closed doors. So when I meet those parents, the first thing I will discuss is I ask about the behaviour at home. I ask about what strategies they use to manage behaviour. What kind of concerns do they have at home? Is the child very, very well behaved at home, or are we seeing similar patterns of behaviour? Poor behaviour at school, poor behaviour at home. And what kind of strategies are they using to manage that behaviour? So I'm looking for sort of rewards and sanctions. And that can be quite powerful. I remember dealing with a particularly challenging student who we just couldn't seem to find anything that was either a reward or a sanction until we discovered about his Xbox. So, his mum would bring his Xbox into us if he'd not had a good week at school, and we would keep it and lock it away, obviously with his mother's permission. And then when he had a very good week at school, we would then release that Xbox and he'd have it for the weekend. So those kinds of working together in unison really, really impacted that child so positively, and he managed to turn his behaviour around mostly. So in that conversation with parents, I like to try and identify what those barriers are to learning and behaviour. So really getting into the details of what is it that they don't like about school, or what is it about this particular environment that is a trigger for them to misbehave. So once you've sort of unpicked all of that detail, you're then going to start to sort of apply practical and measurable steps on how to improve. And this is a really important part of that meeting. You can't leave that meeting just with this wealth of knowledge. I now know that Charlie really enjoys Xbox, and if we take Xbox away, then then that might impact his behaviour positively. But actually, if I leave that meeting having not agreed anything with that parent or with Charlie, that meeting has been almost useless. So it's really important that you leave that meeting with very much detailed, explicit practical steps on what the child needs to do next, how they're going to sort of improve their behaviour. And let's be honest, if that child has had, you know, historic poor behaviour, and you know, then we need to make sure that we have small achievable targets that are then celebrated to give them a feeling of success. But equally, you know, it builds them towards what we're really looking for with that desired child. Now, I'm not saying that we make excuses for that child at all, but I do think it's important that we give them small achievable targets. You know, it can feel like quite a mountain to climb from being, you know, perhaps in the bottom 3% of the school, you know, and your behaviour just consistently does not meet the school's expectations, to switching that around to meeting all of our expectations. And I'm not saying that that child can't do that. I genuinely believe they can, but I believe they need lots of support and guidance and help along the way, and that is going to take time. It is going to take time, and that child's going to need to have small successes along the way. We can't just wait until they're getting it right every day, day in, day out, to celebrate that. We do need to make sure we're celebrating it along the journey. Okay, so when I'm agreeing those practical steps with parents, I try to use sort of a tense that is hopeful. So, for example, I would say, so for, you know, the behaviours that I want to see from Charlie is Charlie is sitting quietly, he's listening, he's allowing other children to concentrate fully, and I speak in a certainty that Charlie is going to be able to achieve these things, and I use the tense of my language to communicate my faith and my belief in the fact that Charlie can achieve this. Following a face-to-face meeting, I promise and deliver lots of communication, and I agree how that's going to happen and how frequently. For me, if a parent has come into school and you've had a meeting and a conversation and you've spent time together, I think part of your job role then is communicating with them to ensure you know, to let them know the impact of that meeting and the impact of the small incremental sort of measures that you've put in place and the targets. So I promise lots of communication and I deliver lots of communication. So I want to talk to you now about what happens if a parent shows up, no meeting, unscheduled, and they're in the main reception, quite cross probably, chances are, and they're sort of demanding that they speak with you there and then. I am very much of the opinion that you don't want to see them. You're setting a dangerous precedent at that point if you agree to see them. It would be utter chaos if all 900 children's parents just showed up in the reception demanding to speak to staff every time they had something that they were unhappy with. It would be chaos and it would be unmanageable. So for me, when the children are in the building, when the students are in their lessons, I'm unavailable to parents. You know, my primary responsibility is the children within the school, and parents need to make an appointment. They need to appreciate your time, they need to value your time, and really you can't just sort of, you know, chances are you'll be too busy to see them anyway. If you absolutely must see them, and it's, you know, quite a serious thing, I would recommend that you keep it brief, and that you schedule a follow-up meeting when you are both free, when it's both convenient, obviously as soon as possible. It might be later that day, for example. Also, sending them away at that point can often allow them a bit of time to cool down, because if they have stormed into school and they're sort of demanding to see you and they're quite cross, the chances are the conversation's not going to be particularly productive at that point. Now, this is where your amazing school receptionists come in, and we have got really amazingly trained school receptionists who know that chances are I'm probably in a meeting, too busy to come down to see that parent, but equally, like, they will know what kind of information I need. You know, what are the details of the complaint, for example, and then that gives me some time to sort of investigate a bit further. So the receptionists are so amazing at the school I've just left, and they would communicate that to me, and allow me to make that decision of, you know, actually this is a really serious extenuating circumstance. I am actually going to go down and see this parent right now. So meetings are your big opportunities. They're your cabinet meetings, you know, they're the big events in the sort of chronological journey of child improvement. It's when you're going to spend time focusing with undivided attention on how you're going to improve the educational experience for that child. And actually, you're going to demonstrate to those parents and that child how deeply curious you are and how much you care about that child having a better experience of education. So they really are very, very important. So take the time to prepare for them. Make sure that you've sort of done your research on the child. Make sure you really fully understand what's been happening recently. You know, look at their attendance, look at their behaviour. You know, read the IEP if you need to. They are important. Parent meetings are important, and impressions. You know, first impressions stick, don't they? They really do. So you know, take them seriously. Parent meetings are also a fantastic opportunity to forge really strong relationships with all of the adults that are looking out for the child. And actually, parent meetings are one of my favourite parts of the job. I won't lie to you. A challenging parent that sort of comes in very cross, very sort of disengaged with the school, you know, and for me it really means a lot to have gone through that journey with that child and with that parent, and hopefully see them turn it around and see that the parent believes in us and trusts us, and we can really show them and reassure them that the child is in the best place, that we are absolutely, that their safety and their education is our paramount focus. So I do, you know, I actually really enjoy a parent meeting. I don't know if that makes me a bit odd. So moving on to one of the last things I'm going to discuss is how I manage a challenging parent over a period of time. So this will be a parent that will present sort of frequently. You'll have lots and lots of conversations with that parent. Perhaps the child has not been getting it right for a sustained period of time. So long term, I would look for opportunities to make positive phone calls. However, only if they are genuine. So it's really important to keep those expectations high for that child. We don't want to give mixed messages to that parent. But equally, you know, if there is an opportunity where that child has done something really good, you know, let's make sure we call, because otherwise the parent's interaction with school just is always negative. You know, and that's a dangerous place to be, isn't it? So we do need to make sure that we try and look out for those opportunities to make positive communications. I'd also ask the pastoral team to sort of be aware of it as well, and they can feed that back to you. If I've got a particularly challenging parent, and I am literally talking about, you know, you might have one or two in a year group, I would ask all staff to be sort of hyper aware of that child, and any incident, anything big or small, they over communicate to you, and you are the sort of gatekeeper of information for that child. And the idea is that you know everything about that child in advance. There's no surprises, and the sort of knowledge of that school day for that child is powerful. It's really powerful, and then hopefully the parent will come to sort of trust and believe that you are looking out for their child and doing your best, of course. I usually, at this point, if I get to that point where I'm thinking, okay, you are a challenging parent that I'm going to make sure that I really manage very carefully, I then make myself the sole contact for that parent. And again, I communicate that to all staff. And the idea then is that you're reducing those confrontations between other staff and that parent. So protecting them, you know, you're trying to do that, because it's nothing worse than calling a parent and thinking it's a sort of relatively easy phone call to make, and actually turns into this huge confrontation. So hopefully you're sort of protecting staff and class teachers from that, which is stressful, but also then you're sort of reducing the confrontation and the flashpoints and the sort of flare-ups that you can get from parents that are quite stressed about school. I would recommend that you keep a file and you document everything. So you document the phone calls, the dates, the times, you know, what was discussed. And again, this goes back to your email communication, where you could follow up phone calls with an email, just documenting your action points and what you discussed, thanking them for your time and things like that. But that serves as a really powerful document to keep everything, you know, everything really explicitly detailed. Also, imagine if I were to be hit by a bus tomorrow, it's really important that that member, you know, the other member of staff that would take over from me knows everything that I know too. So the way that I manage them proactively, so finally a proactive tip comes in, the way I would manage a challenging parent, I over communicate. I over communicate with that parent. So I find that if I schedule a weekly summary or of either a phone call or an email, I find that actually, even though I'm creating workload for myself, somehow along the way, it's actually invested time and it reduces the workload, because I find what happens then is, you know, if I've promised I'm going to do something, I will always do it. And then what I find then is that parent doesn't seem to get that sort of build up of frustration and those explosive, you know, I'm feeling really cross about this situation, because they feel informed. Because I think a lot of the time parents that get quite frustrated and quite cross, it's often a lack of information, a lack of understanding, and sort of not really understanding why things are happening with their child. So my last tip: if all else fails and you've tried all of these tips and you've done all these things and you still just can't find that common ground with the parent, I in the past have offered a tour of the school. And the school needs to be in operation, which is very difficult in COVID. So I recognise this may well be one for when we've all been vaccinated and we're all fit and well. But I offer a tour of the school, and the school is when it's in action. There are bums in seats and teachers delivering lessons. And the idea is that the parent can visualise how their child fits into the community of the school and how they can see how other children are behaving, and then of course they've got the knowledge of how their child has behaved previously. What I would also do is don't necessarily show them around yourself. I've chosen students as tour guides to show a particular, I'm thinking of a particularly cross dad in the past, and I chose students that sort of were very similar to his son. And you know, they were perhaps not, you know, not the best behaved children, students that were of a similar age group and a bit cheeky and didn't always get it right. And they showed the father round, and then I joined them later so that he was able to ask them questions. And I said to the students in front of the parent, you know, tell him the truth. If Mr. So-and-so asks you any questions, I want you to be completely honest with him, and I want you to answer exactly, you know, the truth. So I found this to be really, really powerful. And actually we saw a really, really great improvement in the collaboration of this particular parent, who was incredibly opposed to the school, to the point where he was considering removing his child from our school and taking him to another one, which we didn't want to happen. We knew that's not what was the best thing. That wasn't the best thing for the child. He needed to stay with us, where we had really high expectations of him and he would do well. And actually what we found, it was really powerful. So he, you know, the father could see that all the teachers were fair, and that we certainly weren't victimising his son. So to summarise, I think that if we can understand the why, and we can make any what happen. And as Mark Wilkinson says, this is so important. I think lots of conflict that comes from parents with school often has a root of misunderstanding and miscommunication, and just not understanding how everyday routines build towards a system that just has to happen to make all children successful. With communication for parents, I hold the line, which often puts me in confrontation with parents, but I speak from a place of love, and I make that very clear to parents that my motivations are always the child to be happy and safe, to be able to learn, but also for all other children to be able to learn within the school too. So I always hold the line, but it comes from a place of love. I think it's really important to recognise why we want to improve parental support. And it's because parental opposition is absolute kryptonite for impeccable behaviour. If you've got high expectations of students, and we're, you know, strict and explicit in what we expect of students' behaviour, but we're super warm too, you know, we care about you and we know this is how we need you to behave. But if you've got a parent at home that is undermining all of those things, it's kryptonite. It's kryptonite for that child. That child is not going to meet your expectations. We all need to be rowing in the same direction for success. So I'm going to upload just my tips of my talk today. So that will be available for you to download, or you can DM me if you've got any questions. I'm on Twitter at Tamsin Bellaby. But thank you so much for your time. And if you have any questions, or if you've got any tips for me, please, I'm always learning, then please send them through to me. Thank you so much.